White woman takes black CEO seat, then discovers she owns the entire airline. The moment Rebecca Ashford stepped onto Flight 2847, she felt like the universe was finally rewarding her for 37 years of quiet suffering. First class. She had never sat in first class in her entire life. Not once. Not when she graduated top of her nursing class. Not when she worked double shifts for 18 months straight to pay off her mother's medical bills. Not when she donated a kidney to a stranger because she believed, perhaps foolishly, that good deeds eventually circled back around. But today was different. Her fingers trembled slightly as she clutched the upgraded boarding pass, still not quite believing the gate agent's words from 20 minutes ago. "Ma'am, there's been a computer error with your original seat assignment. We're moving you to first class, seat 2A, at no additional charge. Majestic Airways apologizes for any inconvenience." Inconvenience? Rebecca had nearly laughed in the woman's face. The only inconvenience in her life was the mountain of debt collectors calling her phone, the eviction notice taped to her apartment door, and the fact that she was flying to Seattle for a job interview that was probably her last chance at salvaging a life that had crumbled into ruins over the past year. But she hadn't laughed. Instead, she'd whispered a quiet thank you and walked toward the gate like a woman who had won the lottery but was terrified someone would snatch the ticket from her hands. Now, standing in the first-class cabin of the Boeing 787, Rebecca felt completely out of place. The leather seats were wider than her childhood bed. The other passengers wore watches that cost more than her car, the car that had been repossessed 3 weeks ago. A flight attendant with perfect blonde hair and a smile that seemed genuinely warm offered her champagne before she'd even found her seat. Champagne. At 10 in the morning. "No, thank you," Rebecca said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just water, please." She moved down the aisle, counting the seats. 1A, 1B, there it was. 2A, a window seat, just like the boarding pass said. The seat was occupied. Rebecca's stomach dropped. A man sat in her seat, her miraculous, once-in-a-lifetime, first-class seat. He was tall, even while sitting, with broad shoulders that seemed to command the space around him. His suit was charcoal gray, clearly custom-tailored, and his dark skin gleamed under the cabin's soft lighting. He was typing furiously on a laptop that probably cost more than Rebecca's monthly rent, a wireless earbud tucked into his left ear, his brow furrowed in concentration. He looked important. He looked wealthy. He looked like he belonged here in a way that Rebecca never would. For a moment, she considered saying nothing. Maybe she had read the boarding pass wrong. Maybe she should just find an empty seat in economy and disappear, the way she always did. The way she had been trained to do since childhood: don't make waves, don't cause trouble, don't be a burden. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the eviction notice. Maybe it was the job interview waiting for her in Seattle, the one that required her to finally stand up for herself or lose everything. Maybe it was simply exhaustion, the bone-deep tiredness that came from spending her entire life making herself smaller so others could be comfortable. Whatever it was, Rebecca found herself speaking. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "I think you're in my seat." The man didn't look up. His fingers continued their dance across the keyboard, his attention locked on whatever crisis was unfolding on his screen. "Excuse me," Rebecca repeated, louder this time. "Sir? You're in seat 2A. That's my seat." Finally, he glanced up. His eyes were dark brown, almost black, and they assessed her with the kind of swift, dismissive calculation that Rebecca had seen 1,000 times before, on doctors who didn't believe her pain, on landlords who didn't believe her promises to pay, on men who didn't believe she was worth their time. "I'm sorry," he said, pulling out his earbud. His voice was deep, polished, with just the faintest trace of an accent she couldn't place. "What did you say?" "I said you're in my seat." Rebecca held up her boarding pass, the paper slightly crumpled from her nervous grip. 2A window. "See?" The man's eyes flicked to the boarding pass, then back to her face. For a long moment, he simply stared at her, as if trying to solve a puzzle he found particularly tedious. "There must be some mistake," he said finally. "I always sit in 2A. I've sat in this exact seat for the past 8 years. The airline knows this." "Well, today they gave it to me," Rebecca said. She could feel her cheeks flushing, the eyes of other first-class passengers beginning to turn in their direction. "I'm sure if we just call the flight attendant." "Do you know who I am?" the man interrupted. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Rebecca felt something harden in her chest, something old and familiar, something that had been dormant for far too long. "No," she said calmly. "Should I?" The man's eyebrows rose slightly. "I'm Jonathan Reeves, CEO of Majestic Airways. This airline." He gestured around them with an elegant hand. "I literally own the seat you're claiming is yours." The words hit Rebecca like a physical blow. CEO of the airline. The same airline that had somehow, miraculously, upgraded her ticket. The same airline that was currently carrying her toward the only job interview standing between her and homelessness. A smarter woman would have apologized. A smarter woman would have backed down, found another seat, and prayed that this powerful man wouldn't somehow derail her already derailed life even further. But Rebecca Ashford, for the first time in 37 years, was done being smart. "That's interesting," she said, her voice eerily calm. "Because the boarding pass I'm holding says 2A. And the gate agent who gave it to me said it was my seat. So unless being CEO means you can change the laws of basic ticketing, I'm going to need you to move." The cabin went silent. The other first-class passengers had fully abandoned any pretense of not watching. The flight attendant who had offered Rebecca champagne was frozen mid-aisle, her perfect smile replaced by an expression of pure horror. Jonathan Reeves stared at Rebecca for a long, dangerous moment. Then, slowly, he closed his laptop. "You have no idea what you're doing," he said quietly. "I'm claiming the seat I was assigned," Rebecca replied. "What are you doing?" The CEO's jaw tightened. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced his own boarding pass, brandishing it like a weapon. "Seat 2A. My seat. As it has been for every flight I've taken on this airline for nearly a decade." Rebecca looked at his boarding pass, then at hers. They were identical. Same seat. Same flight. Same impossible situation. "Well," she said slowly, "it appears someone made an error." "Yes," Jonathan said, his voice dropping to a temperature that could freeze water. "And that error was you getting on this plane thinking you could. Is there a problem here?" The voice came from behind Rebecca, and she turned to find the flight attendant, her name tag read Victoria, approaching with the careful, measured steps of someone walking through a minefield. "Yes," Jonathan said before Rebecca could speak. "This woman is claiming my seat. There's obviously been a mistake with her boarding pass. I need you to correct it immediately and move her to wherever she belongs. Wherever she belongs." The word sliced through Rebecca like a blade. She knew what he meant. What he really meant. Economy. The back of the plane. Away from him and his expensive suit and his assumption that the world would always rearrange itself to accommodate his comfort. She had heard variations of those words her entire life. From teachers who shuffled her to the back of the classroom. From neighbors who clutched their purses when she walked by, despite her pale skin and unremarkable appearance. From employers who told her she wasn't the right fit without ever explaining what the right fit looked like. But something about hearing them now, in first class, on the day that was supposed to change her life, something about that made Rebecca feel like she was going to shatter. Or explode. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, and her voice came out stronger than she expected. "I have a valid boarding pass. I was upgraded by your airline's own computer system. If anyone needs to move, it's not me." Victoria, the flight attendant, looked like she wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. "Ma'am, sir, please, let me see both boarding passes. I'm sure we can sort this out." She examined the documents, her frown deepening with each passing second. "This is unusual. You both have valid assignments for 2A. There must have been a system glitch. Let me contact the gate. I don't have time for this, Jonathan snapped. He was already reaching for his phone, his fingers moving with the practiced efficiency of a man used to making problems disappear. I'm calling my assistant. She'll have this sorted in 30 seconds. While you're doing that, Rebecca said, shocking herself with her own boldness, I'm going to sit in my seat. And before anyone could stop her, she did exactly that, sliding into seat 2B, directly beside the window seat Jonathan still occupied. Their shoulders nearly touched. His cologne smelled expensive, like sandalwood and power. Jonathan Reeves turned to stare at her with an expression of pure disbelief. What do you think you're doing? Compromising, Rebecca said sweetly. You can keep your precious 2A. I'll take 2B. Problem solved. That's not, I didn't. For the first time, the CEO seemed genuinely at a loss for words. You can't just. I already did. Victoria, the flight attendant, was now visibly sweating. Ma'am, 2B is actually assigned to. To whom? Rebecca asked. Because I don't see anyone else here claiming it. As if on cue, a voice boomed from the front of the cabin. Is that Rebecca? Rebecca Ashford? Rebecca's blood turned to ice. She knew that voice. She had been running from that voice for nearly 2 decades. She had changed her phone number, moved across 3 states, and worked desperately to erase every trace of her connection to the family that had abandoned her. But the past, it seemed, had finally caught up. She turned slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs, and found herself face to face with a ghost. Charles Whitmore stood in the first-class cabin doorway, his white hair perfectly coiffed, his blue eyes sparkling with a mixture of surprise and something else, something that looked almost like triumph. He was 82 years old, but he moved with the vigor of a man half his age, his tailored suit immaculate, his presence commanding every eye in the cabin. Rebecca, he said again, and his voice cracked on the second syllable. My God. After all these years. Rebecca couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't do anything except stare at the man who had destroyed her mother's life and, by extension, her own. Charles Whitmore. Billionaire. Philanthropist. Aviation pioneer. And the father who had abandoned her before she was even born. The seconds stretched into hours. Rebecca sat frozen in seat 2B, her mind struggling to process what was happening. Charles Whitmore, the Charles Whitmore, whose name graced hospitals and university buildings and the sides of airplanes, was walking toward her with tears in his eyes. I don't understand, Jonathan Reeves said, his CEO authority temporarily forgotten. Charles, do you know this woman? Charles didn't answer. He was still staring at Rebecca with an expression of wonder, as if she were a miracle he had long stopped praying for. You look just like her, he whispered. Just like Elizabeth. Your mother. The mention of her mother's name snapped Rebecca out of her paralysis. She stood abruptly, nearly colliding with Victoria, the flight attendant, who had been hovering nearby in a state of professional panic. Don't, Rebecca said, and her voice was barely recognizable, raw, sharp, edged with 18 years of suppressed rage. Don't you dare say her name. Charles flinched as if she had struck him. Rebecca, please. Let me explain. Explain what? The words exploded from her, loud enough to make several first-class passengers drop their champagne glasses. How you got my mother pregnant and then disappeared? How you left her alone, with nothing, to raise a child she never planned for? How she worked herself to death, literally to death, trying to give me a life while you were off building your empire? It wasn't like that, Charles said, his voice breaking. I didn't know. Your mother, she never told me about you. I only found out 3 years ago, Rebecca interrupted bitterly. Yes, I know. Your private investigators are very thorough. They tracked me down right after Mom died, offered me money to go away, to sign papers promising never to reveal our connection. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. I told them to go to hell. Jonathan Reeves was watching this exchange with the rapt attention of someone witnessing a car crash in slow motion. Victoria had quietly retreated to the galley, likely to inform the captain that first class had turned into a family therapy session. "Rebecca," Charles said, taking a step closer. "Those investigators, I didn't send them. I swear to you. I didn't even know you existed until 18 months ago, when I found letters in Elizabeth's old belongings. Letters she never sent. Letters about you." Rebecca's anger wavered for just a moment. Letters? Her mother had kept letters? "You're lying," she said, but her voice had lost some of its edge. "I'm not." Charles reached into his jacket and produced an envelope, yellowed with age, the handwriting on the front achingly familiar. "I've been carrying this with me for months. Praying that someday I would find you, that I could show you the truth." He held out the envelope. Rebecca stared at it like it was a bomb. "What truth?" she whispered. "The truth about who you are," Charles said. "The truth about who I am. And the truth about why you're really on this airplane today." The next hour unfolded like a fever dream. Rebecca found herself in the airplane's private lounge, a space she hadn't even known existed, sitting across from Charles Whitmore while Jonathan Reeves lingered in the corner, his expression unreadable. Victoria had brought coffee, tea, and a plate of pastries that no one touched. The plane had taken off somewhere in the middle of their conversation. Rebecca hadn't even noticed. The clouds drifted past the windows like white ghosts, and she felt equally insubstantial, as if the slightest wind might scatter her into pieces. Charles spoke for nearly 45 minutes. He told her about meeting Elizabeth in the summer of 1985, when he was a young pilot and she was a flight attendant for a small regional airline. He told her about their whirlwind romance, their secret wedding, a wedding that his wealthy, disapproving family had annulled within weeks, claiming he was too young, that she was unsuitable, that the marriage would destroy his future. "They paid her off," Charles said, his voice heavy with shame. "My parents. They gave her money to disappear, to never contact me again. She signed the papers. And his voice broke. "I was young and stupid and too afraid of my own family to fight for her. By the time I came to my senses, she was gone. Vanished. I looked for her for years, but she had changed her name, moved across the country. I thought she wanted nothing to do with me." "She thought you wanted nothing to do with her," Rebecca said quietly. The anger was still there, burning beneath her surface, but it had been joined by something else, a terrible, aching grief. "She thought you had abandoned her. I know that now." Charles closed his eyes. "I found the letters after a box of her belongings was delivered to my attorney's office. She had specified in her will that certain things should be sent to me after her death. Personal effects. Photographs. And these letters, dozens of them, that she had written over the years but never mailed." He opened the envelope he had shown her earlier and spread its contents across the table. Photographs of Rebecca as a baby. As a toddler. As a gap-toothed first grader. School report cards. Dance recital programs. A lock of fine blonde hair sealed in a tiny plastic bag. "She documented everything," Charles said. "Your entire life. She wanted me to know you. She just couldn't bring herself to reach out, not after what my family had done to her." Rebecca picked up one of the photographs with trembling fingers. She was maybe 3 years old, sitting on her mother's lap, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. Her mother looked so young. So happy. So alive. "She told me my father was dead," Rebecca whispered. "She said you died in a plane crash when I was a baby. She said that's why we never had any money, because there was no insurance, no savings, nothing. She worked 3 jobs to support us." 3 jobs, Charles. While you were building your aviation empire, she was cleaning offices at midnight just to keep a roof over our heads. The guilt on Charles's face was almost too painful to look at. "I didn't know," he said again. "I swear to God, Rebecca, I didn't know." "Would it have mattered if you did?" The question hung in the air, sharp and unforgiving. Charles didn't answer. He didn't have to. Why are you telling me this now? Rebecca asked. Why here, on this plane? This can't be coincidence. It's not. Charles glanced at Jonathan, who nodded slightly. I own this airline, Rebecca. Majestic Airways. I founded it 30 years ago. When I discovered you were booked on this flight, I arranged for you to be upgraded to first class. I wanted us to meet in a controlled environment, somewhere I could explain everything without me being able to run away, Rebecca finished flatly. Yes, Charles admitted. I was afraid. Afraid you would refuse to see me. Afraid you would disappear again. I've already lost so many years with you. I couldn't bear to lose more. Jonathan stepped forward, his CEO mask slipping slightly to reveal something almost human beneath. Rebecca, I know this is overwhelming. And I owe you an apology for earlier. I didn't realize who you were. If I had known. Known what? Rebecca interrupted. That I was the illegitimate daughter of your company's owner? Would that have made me more worthy of a seat? Jonathan's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He simply reached into his briefcase and produced a thick folder of documents. Charles asked me to be here today for a reason, he said. A reason that goes beyond this reunion. There's something you need to know, something that changes everything. Rebecca looked at the folder like it might bite her. What is it? The truth about your inheritance, Charles said quietly. The documents were dense, filled with legal jargon and corporate terminology that made Rebecca's head spin. But certain words jumped out at her, burned themselves into her brain. Sole heir. Controlling interest. Immediate transfer. This doesn't make sense, she said, shoving the papers away. You barely know me. I'm sure you have other family, other children. You can't just. I don't have other children, Charles said. I never remarried after Elizabeth. Never wanted to. The annulment, it broke something in me. I threw myself into building this company because it was the only thing that made the pain go away. But surely you have nephews, nieces, people who expect. People who expect to inherit my money, Charles finished grimly. Yes. My brother's children. And they have made their expectations very clear over the years. But I never promised them anything, and I certainly never intended to leave them my life's work. He leaned forward, his blue eyes intense. You are my daughter, Rebecca. My only child. And legally, morally, ethically, everything I have belongs to you. Rebecca felt the blood drain from her face. I don't want it. Rebecca. I don't want it. She was on her feet now, pacing the small lounge like a caged animal. I spent my entire life thinking my father was dead. I spent 18 years watching my mother destroy herself trying to give me opportunities you could have provided with your pocket change. And now you want to, what, make it up to me with money? With an airline? With private jets and first-class seats? I want to give you what should have always been yours, Charles said. I want to give you your birthright. My birthright was a father. The words exploded from Rebecca, raw and uncontrolled. My birthright was having someone at my school plays, at my graduation, at my mother's funeral. My birthright was not having to donate a kidney to pay for medical bills. My birthright was not getting evicted from my apartment last month because I couldn't afford rent. The silence that followed was deafening. Charles's face had gone gray. Evicted? Rebecca, I didn't know. My investigators said you were doing well, that you had a nursing career. I lost my nursing license 6 months ago, Rebecca said, the confession tearing out of her like poison from a wound. I made a mistake, a single, stupid mistake involving medication dosages, and the hospital board decided to make an example of me. I've been applying to out-of-state positions ever since, trying to find somewhere that will give me a second chance. This flight to Seattle? It's for an interview at a small clinic that might overlook my record. Jonathan, who had been standing silently through this exchange, spoke up. The computer upgrade wasn't random. We flagged your name when you booked the ticket. You've been watching me? Rebecca stared at him with fresh horror. We've been trying to help you, Jonathan said. Anonymously. The job interview you're flying to? That clinic is owned by a subsidiary of Majestic Airways. Charles arranged. Stop. Rebecca held up her hand. Just stop. You arranged my job interview? Is anything in my life actually mine, or has everything been orchestrated by a father I didn't know existed? Charles rose slowly, his age suddenly showing in the stiffness of his movements. Rebecca, I am an old man. I have maybe 5 years left, maybe less, the doctors are not optimistic. I have spent the last 18 months trying to find a way to make things right with you. Not because I want forgiveness, I know I don't deserve that. But because you deserve to know who you are. And you deserve the life that was stolen from you. He walked to the window, staring out at the clouds. When your mother died, I inherited more than just her letters. I inherited her legal documents, including the original marriage certificate. The one my family paid a judge to destroy. But she had hidden a copy. A certified copy that proves, beyond any doubt, that our marriage was valid. Rebecca's heart stopped. What are you saying? I'm saying that the annulment was fraudulent. I'm saying that legally, your mother was my wife until the day she died. And I'm saying that you, Rebecca Ashford, are not my illegitimate daughter. He turned to face her, and there were tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. You are my legitimate heir. You are not just entitled to my fortune. You are, and have always been, Rebecca Whitmore. The revelation hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Rebecca Whitmore. The name felt foreign on her tongue, like a borrowed coat that didn't quite fit. She had been Rebecca Ashford her entire life, named after her maternal grandmother, raised in the shadow of absence and poverty and fierce, desperate love. To suddenly become someone else, to suddenly become the daughter of one of the wealthiest men in aviation history, felt less like a gift and more like an erasure. I don't want to be a Whitmore, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Charles flinched as if she had struck him. Rebecca, please. You don't understand. She turned to face him, and for the first time, she saw not a villain, not an abandoner, but simply an old man who had made terrible choices and was now running out of time to correct them. My mother chose the name Ashford. She chose to give me her family's name, to raise me in her family's tradition. That choice meant something. And I'm not willing to throw it away just because. You don't have to throw anything away, Jonathan interrupted gently. You can keep whatever name you want. But the legal reality remains, you are Charles's heir. You inherit his controlling interest in Majestic Airways. You become, effectively, one of the most powerful women in commercial aviation. Effectively, Rebecca repeated bitterly. You mean on paper? You mean I become a figurehead while the real decisions continue to be made by people like you? Jonathan's expression shifted, a flicker of something that might have been respect. Actually, no. Charles has been very clear about his intentions. He wants you to be more than a figurehead. He wants you to learn the business, to understand how the company operates, to eventually take over as CEO. To take over. Rebecca looked at Jonathan with new understanding. Wait. Wouldn't that mean? Yes, Jonathan said, and his voice was surprisingly calm. It would mean you would eventually become my boss. Or, more accurately, you would be in a position to decide whether I remain CEO at all. Rebecca stared at him. And you're okay with that? I'm not okay with anything about this situation, Jonathan admitted. An hour ago, I was trying to kick you out of my seat. Now I'm discovering that you technically own that seat, along with every other seat on this airline. He ran a hand over his face, suddenly looking less like a powerful executive and more like a very tired man. But I've worked with Charles for 15 years. I trust his judgment. If he believes you're capable of running this company, then I'm willing to give you a chance to prove it. A chance. Rebecca laughed humorlessly. How generous of you. Rebecca. Charles moved toward her, his steps uncertain, as if he was afraid she might bolt. I know this is overwhelming. I know you need time to process everything. But there's something else you need to know, something that can't wait. More revelations? Rebecca shook her head. I don't think I can handle any more revelations. This one is important. Charles reached into his jacket and produced another envelope, this one newer, the paper crisp and official looking. I received this yesterday. It's from my brother's attorneys. My nephew, Theodore, has filed a lawsuit challenging my mental competency. He's trying to have me declared unfit to manage my own affairs. The words took a moment to sink in. He's trying to steal your company. Our company, Charles corrected gently. And yes, Theodore has been positioning himself for years to take over after my death. When he discovered I had found you, that I intended to change my will, he shook his head. He accelerated his timeline. The competency hearing is scheduled for next week. But you're clearly competent, Rebecca said. Anyone can see that. Can they? Charles sighed. I'm 82 years old, Rebecca. I've had 2 heart attacks in the past 3 years. I've made some unconventional decisions lately. Theodore has witnesses who will testify that I've been confused, erratic, possibly suffering from early dementia. That's ridiculous. It's strategy, Jonathan said grimly. Theodore Whitmore is one of the most ruthless corporate lawyers in the country. He knows exactly how to manipulate the legal system. And he knows that if he can get Charles declared incompetent before the will is officially changed, every asset, including the shares that would have gone to Rebecca, reverts to the next in line. To Theodore, Rebecca finished. To Theodore. She sank back into her seat, the weight of everything pressing down on her like a physical force. 24 hours ago, she had been a disgraced nurse with an eviction notice and a prayer. Now she was apparently the heir to a billion-dollar empire, caught in the middle of a family power struggle she wanted no part of. Why me? She asked finally. You don't even know me, Charles. We met an hour ago. How can you be so certain that I'm the right person to inherit everything you've built? Charles sat down across from her, his ancient eyes filled with a sadness that seemed to stretch back decades. Because I knew your mother, he said softly. Elizabeth was the strongest, most principled person I ever met. She walked away from my family's money not because she didn't need it, but because she refused to be bought. She raised you alone, without a penny of support, because she believed that integrity mattered more than comfort. He reached across the table and took her hand, gently, tentatively, as if she might pull away at any moment. You came onto this airplane today with a crumpled boarding pass and the courage to stand up to a CEO who was trying to intimidate you. You didn't back down. You didn't apologize. You demanded what was rightfully yours. His voice cracked. That is your mother in you, Rebecca. That is the woman I loved and lost and have been mourning for 37 years. And that is why I know, beyond any doubt, that you are exactly the right person to inherit my legacy. The plane landed in Seattle 3 hours later, but Rebecca barely noticed. The rest of the flight had passed in a blur of documents, phone calls, and hurried consultations with lawyers who appeared via video conference on Jonathan's tablet. Charles's legal team was already mobilizing to fight Theodore's competency challenge, but everyone agreed that Rebecca's existence complicated matters significantly. The media will have a field day, said a sharp-voiced attorney named Sandra Chin. Billionaire aviation pioneer discovers secret daughter, changes will at the last minute, family outraged. It writes itself. We need to get ahead of the story, Jonathan added. Control the narrative before Theodore's people leak their version. What narrative? Rebecca asked. There's no narrative. There's just this. Whatever this is. But she knew, even as she said it, that she was being naive. Stories like this didn't just happen. They were crafted, shaped, weaponized. And in the world she had suddenly found herself inhabiting, narrative was everything. They deplaned through a private terminal, another experience Rebecca had never imagined, and were immediately ushered into a fleet of black SUVs with tinted windows. The Seattle skyline glittered in the distance, the Space Needle piercing the gray clouds like a needle threading through fabric. "Where are we going?" Rebecca asked, suddenly aware that she had no idea what the plan was. "The Whitmore estate," Charles said. "I have a home here, near Puget Sound. It's private, secure. You'll be safe there while we figure out next steps." "Safe from what?" Charles and Jonathan exchanged a look that made Rebecca's blood run cold. "There are some things we haven't told you yet," Jonathan said carefully. "Things about Theodore. About what he's capable of." "He's tried to have me killed," Charles said quietly. 3 times. The SUV suddenly felt very small. "Excuse me?" "The heart attacks," Charles continued, his voice eerily calm. "They weren't natural. My doctors found traces of a compound that causes cardiac arrest, nearly undetectable, designed to mimic natural heart failure. Someone was poisoning me." Rebecca's hand flew to her mouth. "And you think Theodore?" "I know Theodore. He's my brother's son. I watched him grow up, watched him develop into the man he is today. And I know, without a shadow of a doubt, that he is capable of murder if it means securing the company." The SUV wound through increasingly exclusive neighborhoods, past homes that looked more like fortresses than residences. Rebecca's head was spinning. "Why haven't you gone to the police?" "With what evidence?" Charles asked. "Theodore is a lawyer. He knows how to cover his tracks. The compound used was experimental, impossible to source through normal channels. The only reason we even know about it is because one of my doctors happened to be an expert in toxicology." "So you're just living with the knowledge that your nephew is trying to kill you?" "I'm taking precautions," Charles said. "Enhanced security. Food tasters. Vigilant staff. But I'm also 82 years old, Rebecca. At a certain point, you accept that death is coming, one way or another. What matters is what you leave behind." The SUV pulled through a massive iron gate and up a winding driveway. The Whitmore estate sprawled across the landscape like something out of a fairy tale: stone walls, towering windows, gardens that seemed to stretch for acres. "This is your house?" Rebecca breathed. "One of them," Charles said. "But soon, it will be yours." The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Rebecca was introduced to an army of staff, chefs, groundskeepers, security personnel, personal assistants whose sole job was to anticipate her every need. She was fitted for new clothes, briefed on family history, tutored in corporate protocols. It was like being thrown into an intensive training program for a job she had never applied for. Through it all, she found herself gravitating toward Jonathan Reeves. The CEO was a contradiction, cold and professional in public, surprisingly warm in private. He had grown up poor, he told her during one of their evening conversations, raised by a single mother in Atlanta. He had earned his MBA on scholarship, worked his way up through the airline industry, and caught Charles's attention through sheer brilliance and determination. "Charles gave me a chance when no one else would," Jonathan said. They were sitting on the estate's veranda, watching the sun set over Puget Sound. The aviation industry wasn't exactly welcoming to black executives in the 1990s. But Charles didn't care about that. He only cared about results. "He's a good man," Rebecca said softly. "Isn't he?" "He's a complicated man," Jonathan corrected. "He's made mistakes, terrible mistakes. But he's also spent his entire life trying to make up for them. The charitable foundations. The diversity initiatives. The scholarships for underprivileged students." He paused. "He started all of it after he lost your mother. I think he was trying to become the person he wished he had been. Does that excuse abandoning her?" "No. But it explains what came after." Jonathan turned to look at her, his dark eyes serious. "Rebecca, I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But Charles is dying. Whatever you decide about the inheritance, about the company, please don't let him die without knowing that you've at least tried to forgive him." Before Rebecca could respond, the veranda doors burst open. One of the security guards, a massive man named Derek, was sprinting toward them, his face white with fear. "Sir. Ma'am. We have a situation." Theodore Whitmore had arrived. He stood in the estate's grand foyer, flanked by lawyers and what appeared to be private security of his own. He was in his 50s, with the kind of silver fox handsomeness that came from expensive grooming and careful genetics. His suit probably cost more than Rebecca's entire former wardrobe, and his smile was the coldest thing she had ever seen. "Ah," he said as Rebecca and Jonathan descended the main staircase. "The mysterious heir appears. I was beginning to think you were a figment of my uncle's deteriorating imagination." "Theodore," Charles said, emerging from the library with surprising speed for a man his age. "You were not invited here." "I don't need an invitation. I still own shares in this family, even if you've decided to hand everything over to a stranger." Theodore's icy gaze swept over Rebecca, assessing her like a piece of merchandise. "A stranger who, I might add, has an extremely convenient story about lost marriages and secret daughters." "The marriage certificate is authentic," Jonathan said coolly. "We've had it verified by 3 independent experts." "Of course you have. And I'm sure those experts are all on Charles's payroll." Theodore stepped closer to Rebecca, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and vaguely medicinal. "Tell me, Ms. Ashford. Or should I say Ms. Whitmore? What is it you actually want here?" Rebecca found her voice. "I didn't ask for any of this." "Oh, I'm sure you didn't. A poor, struggling nurse suddenly discovers she's the heir to a billion-dollar fortune? How terribly inconvenient for you." Theodore's smile widened. "Let me guess. You're going to reluctantly accept your inheritance, move into the estate, and quietly take over the company that my family built." "Your family?" Charles's voice cracked like a whip. "Our father built this company, Theodore. I expanded it. You've done nothing but circle like a vulture, waiting for me to die. Because you've given me no choice." For the first time, Theodore's composed mask slipped, revealing the rage beneath. "You've spent 40 years treating me like an afterthought. Refusing to name me as your successor. Dangling the company in front of me like a carrot, then snatching it away whenever I got too close. And now you're going to hand everything over to some woman who didn't even know you existed until last week? Rebecca is my daughter. My legitimate heir. She's a con artist who's manipulating a senile old man." Theodore whirled on his lawyers. "I want her investigated. I want every aspect of her story examined and exposed. And I want the competency hearing moved up, tomorrow if possible." "You can't do that," Jonathan said. "Watch me." Theodore smiled again, and this time it was the smile of a predator who had just spotted wounded prey. "I have judges in my pocket, Mr. Reeves. I have connections you can't even imagine. And I have been preparing for this moment for my entire adult life." He turned back to Charles, and something almost like sadness flickered across his face. "I used to look up to you, Uncle. When I was a boy, I wanted to be just like you. But you never saw me. Never acknowledged me. Never gave me a chance to prove myself." "I gave you every chance," Charles said quietly. "And every time, you chose the wrong path." "The wrong path?" Theodore laughed bitterly. "I chose efficiency. Pragmatism. Results. Everything you taught me to value. The only difference is that I'm not hypocritical enough to pretend otherwise." The standoff continued for several more minutes, lawyers threatening counter-threats, security guards eyeing each other warily. Finally, Theodore and his entourage departed, leaving behind a silence that felt like the calm before a storm. "That went well," Jonathan muttered. "He's going to try something," Rebecca said. She could feel it in her bones, the same instinct that had kept her alive during years of working in underfunded hospitals and dangerous neighborhoods. Something beyond the competency hearing. Something worse. Charles nodded slowly. "I know. That's why we need to move quickly." "Move quickly to do what?" To transfer everything to you, Charles said. Tonight. Before Theodore can get his injunctions in place. The next 8 hours were the most surreal of Rebecca's life. Charles's legal team arrived en masse, transforming the estate's library into a war room of documents and digital signatures. A notary was summoned. Witnesses were called. Every formality that could possibly be expedited was expedited. By midnight, Rebecca Ashford, Rebecca Whitmore, was officially the majority shareholder of Majestic Airways. She signed the final document with trembling hands, still not entirely believing what she was doing. The net worth of the shares she now controlled exceeded $2 billion. The airline employed over 40,000 people. The responsibility was staggering. It's done, Charles said, leaning back in his chair with an expression of profound relief. Whatever happens now, Theodore can't take this from you. He'll fight it, Rebecca said. Of course he will. But he'll lose. The transfer is legitimate, properly executed, and witnessed by half a dozen of the most respected attorneys in the country. Charles smiled weakly. My nephew may be ruthless, but I've been planning this for 18 months. I've thought of everything. Almost everything, a new voice said. Rebecca spun around to find Theodore standing in the library doorway, but this time, he wasn't alone. A dozen men in tactical gear spread out behind him, their weapons very clearly not concealed. Theodore, Charles said, his voice barely a whisper. What have you done? What I should have done years ago. Theodore strolled into the library as casually as if he were walking into a coffee shop. His security force moved with him, efficiently herding the lawyers and staff into a corner. You thought you were so clever, uncle. Moving up the transfer, trying to get ahead of my legal challenges. But you forgot one crucial thing. He stopped directly in front of Rebecca, his cold eyes boring into hers. The courts aren't the only way to invalidate an inheritance. What happened next unfolded like a nightmare in slow motion. Theodore's men seized control of the estate, cutting phone lines and disabling cell signals. The lawyers were locked in a basement wine cellar. The security staff was overwhelmed and restrained. Within 20 minutes, the Whitmore compound had become a prison. Rebecca found herself shoved into Charles's study, along with Charles himself and Jonathan. Theodore paced before them like a general surveying his conquered territory. You understand what happens now, Theodore said. You're going to sign new documents. Documents transferring everything back to me. And then we're going to have a tragic accident, a gas leak, perhaps, or an electrical fire. These old estates are so dangerous. You're going to kill us, Rebecca said flatly. I'm going to tie up loose ends, Theodore corrected. Charles has been declining for years. His secret daughter appeared out of nowhere, clearly after his money. A fight broke out. Violence ensued. By the time anyone pieces together what really happened, I'll be the grieving nephew who inherits what's left. The lawyers, Jonathan said. They know about the transfer. They'll testify. Lawyers can be bought, Mr. Reeves. Or silenced. Or both. Theodore smiled. I've been doing this for a very long time. You'd be amazed at what money and power can accomplish. Charles, who had been silent throughout this exchange, suddenly spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that made even Theodore pause. I always knew this day might come, Charles said. I always knew that you were capable of this. That's why I prepared. Theodore's smile flickered. Prepared how? The transfer documents you're so eager to destroy? They're not the originals. Charles's eyes, still sharp despite everything, met Rebecca's. The real documents were filed electronically 3 hours ago. Simultaneously transmitted to 17 different law firms across 12 countries. Right now, regulatory agencies in the United States, the EU, and Asia are receiving certified copies of the ownership transfer. Theodore's face went pale. That's impossible. We jammed all communications. You jammed cell signals and landlines, Charles agreed. But you didn't think about the satellite uplink in my study. It's been transmitting continuously since you walked through my door. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Theodore lunged toward Charles's desk, ripping open drawers, searching frantically for the device Charles had described. He found it, a small, unassuming box that looked like a router, just as a new sound cut through the night. Helicopters. That would be the FBI, Jonathan said, unable to keep the satisfaction out of his voice. Charles filed criminal complaints against you months ago, Theodore. We've been building a case. Collecting evidence. Waiting for you to make a move that couldn't be explained away by lawyers. Theodore's face contorted with rage. You planned this. You wanted me to. I wanted you to show your true colors, Charles said. And you did. Spectacularly. The next few minutes were chaos, FBI agents swarming the estate, Theodore's mercenaries surrendering, Theodore himself being dragged away in handcuffs while screaming threats and obscenities. Through it all, Rebecca stood frozen, trying to process the fact that she was still alive, still breathing, still the unexpected heir to an empire she never wanted. When the dust finally settled, Charles took her hand. I'm sorry, he said. I should have warned you about the trap. But I needed Theodore to believe he had one. It was the only way to make him reveal himself completely. You used me as bait, Rebecca said. Yes. Charles didn't flinch from the accusation. And I will spend whatever time I have left trying to make that up to you. But Rebecca, you handled yourself magnificently tonight. You didn't panic. You didn't break. Your mother would be so proud. At the mention of her mother, something in Rebecca finally cracked. The tears she had been holding back, for hours, for days, for years, came flooding out. She cried for the father she had never known, for the mother she had lost, for the life she had lived and the life that now stretched before her, terrifying and unknown. Charles held her through all of it, his old arms surprisingly strong, his cheeks wet with tears of his own. I'm so sorry, he whispered. For everything. For all of it. I'm so sorry. 6 months later, Rebecca stood at the window of her new office, the CEO suite at Majestic Airways Seattle headquarters, and watched as the afternoon sun painted the city in shades of gold. So much had changed. Theodore's trial had been swift and decisive. The evidence against him was overwhelming, not just the attempted takeover, but years of financial crimes, bribery, and the poisoning attempts against Charles. He would spend the rest of his life in prison. Charles, despite the ordeal, had rallied. His doctors credited it to renewed purpose, to finally having someone to live for. He was stepping back from company operations, but he came to the office every day, teaching Rebecca everything he knew about the aviation industry, introducing her to contacts he had cultivated over decades. Jonathan remained as CEO, at least for now. He and Rebecca had developed an uneasy partnership that was slowly evolving into something approaching friendship. They argued constantly, about strategy, about priorities, about the direction of the company, but they also pushed each other to be better. It was, Rebecca had to admit, exactly what she needed. She had changed her name, in the end. Not to Whitmore, that still felt like a borrowed identity, but to a hyphenated compromise, Rebecca Ashford Whitmore. It was awkward and complicated and didn't quite fit, but then again, neither did she. And maybe that was okay. A knock at the door interrupted her reverie. Ms. Ashford Whitmore? Your 3 o'clock is here. Rebecca turned from the window, smoothing her suit, a custom-tailored charcoal gray that Jonathan had helped her select. Send them in. The door opened to reveal a young woman, maybe 19 or 20, with dark skin, braided hair, and an expression of barely contained nervousness. She was dressed in the kind of carefully chosen outfit that signaled a job interview, and she was clutching a folder to her chest like a lifeline. Ms. Ashford Whitmore, the young woman said, her voice slightly trembling. Thank you so much for seeing me. I'm Destiny Williams. I applied for the internship program? Rebecca smiled. She had started the internship program herself, just last month, a pipeline specifically designed for young people from backgrounds like her own, like Jonathan's. Young people who had talent and drive but no connections, no one to open doors for them. "Please, call me Rebecca," she said. "And have a seat, Destiny. I've been looking forward to meeting you." As Destiny settled into the chair across from her desk, Rebecca felt something shift inside her chest, a warmth she hadn't expected, a sense of rightness she hadn't felt in years. This was why she had accepted the inheritance. Not for the money, not for the power, but for moments like this. For the chance to change things. To make the world a little more fair, a little more just. To honor her mother's memory by becoming someone worth remembering. Epilogue, the letter. 1 year later, Rebecca sat in the estate's garden, reading a letter her mother had written 37 years ago. Charles had given her the entire collection of unsent letters, but she had been parceling them out slowly, savoring each one like a precious gift. They were her mother's voice, preserved across time, funny and sad and angry and hopeful, a chronicle of a woman who had been failed by the world but refused to let the world define her. This particular letter was dated 3 months after Rebecca's birth. "My darling daughter. You are sleeping in your crib as I write this, and I cannot stop staring at you. You have his eyes, that deep, impossible blue, but you have my stubbornness. I can already tell. You know what you want, and you are not afraid to scream for it. I hope you never lose that, Rebecca. I hope the world never convinces you to make yourself small. I hope you grow up knowing that you are worthy of taking up space, of demanding your seat at the table, of refusing to be pushed aside by anyone, no matter how powerful they think they are. I don't know what your life will look like. I don't know if I'll ever find the courage to tell you the truth about your father. But I know this, you were not a mistake. You were not an accident. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I will spend every moment of my life trying to give you the world you deserve. All my love, forever and always. Mom." Rebecca folded the letter carefully and looked up at the sky. A plane was passing overhead, one of hers, she knew, from the distinctive blue and silver paint scheme of Majestic Airways. "I got my seat, Mom," she whispered. "And I'm not giving it up." The plane disappeared into the clouds, and Rebecca smiled, tears streaming down her face. She had started this journey as a woman with nothing, no money, no connections, no future. She had fought for a seat that wasn't supposed to be hers, challenged a powerful man who thought he could intimidate her, and discovered that she was so much more than she had ever been allowed to believe. But the greatest discovery of all wasn't the inheritance, or the company, or the billions of dollars now attached to her name. It was the understanding that she had always been worthy. That she had always been enough. That the woman her mother had raised, stubborn, principled, unafraid, was exactly the woman the world needed. And somewhere, on the other side of whatever came next, Elizabeth Ashford was smiling. The end.